He ran to the corner of 60th Avenue in Oregon. He had his back turned. He wasn't looking. He couldn't tell you what Officer Holly was at that point because he had his back to him. He could have made it up and said, no, I saw him, but he didn't do that. He was running for his life. As he told you, he could tell you where he was, but I could tell you where he wasn't. He wasn't over here where I was looking, and I wasn't firing. He could certainly tell you that. And Patsy Jones can tell you, well, the officer was right there next to me. Initially, when the gun came out, then I heard, hold up, and Officer Goya said it wasn't him, so we know that the person who said, hold up, was Officer Anthony Holly. Nobody else was talking. There were no other people there. By that point, according to what they've already admitted, Goya had already taken off. So there's only two people left. It wasn't the defendant, so circumstantially speaking, it was Anthony Holly. And you see where his body was found, in the back of the Kia, facing westbound, out toward the middle of the street. Yes, he moved at that point, and he was moving, trying to get away, because before anything else happened, while Officer Goya was running, there was the shot that rang out by the defendant. Patsy Jones told you that. Officer Goya told you that. Officer Goya can't tell you where Officer Holly was. Neither can Patsy Jones, but the first person shooting was the defendant. And then she sees him again going back there and shooting. Well, who's back there? The only person that's still moving at that point is Goya, because Holly was very close to the back of the car. It was very quick for him. He was not able to get away. Again, it's a function of time. So who do these set of facts tell you fired the shot? The defendant. Absolutely nobody else. So when Officer Goya then finally turns around and begins shooting, he said, well, he could have stood up here and he could have told you. And that's the mark of someone who is being consistent to the truth. But he could have told you, hey, I saw him and I didn't shoot him. But he said, I was focused. I was focused on the threat. I was not focused on the person shooting at me. It was light, so he could see him. It wasn't like he couldn't see. I was focused on that person, and I know one thing. I know where Officer Holly wasn't. He wasn't in my line of fire. So circumstantially, this is the guy that did the killing. And Officer Goya said, for example, you know, I know there's a bathroom up here on the 5th floor. Remember him telling me that? I can't see it on the witness stand, but I can certainly tell you where it is. And the same thing with regard to Officer Holly. He was watching a threat. He wasn't watching anything else, so if he was shooting at the defendant. And you saw where the shots went, following the defendant as he went along. So the defendant shot and killed Officer Holly. One shot, went down. And he tries to kill the other officer. He doesn't want any other witnesses, of course, because he can then really get away, right? Isn't this the big person that he is? The person who brings a .357, and it is his .357. The duffel bag does have identification with his name on it. It is not Patsy Jones, and it certainly does not belong to Giada Costas. So it's his. Nobody else has a gun. And then he goes to get away, but he takes a fighting shot. Then he goes around the corner. And as he goes around the corner, that's about the time that Officer Goya is able to get him to the knee. And then he takes off and runs. And by runs, I mean, I don't know if he was running, we don't know that he was hitting the knee. Maybe he walked, maybe he did something else. But he was able to get some portion away down towards 59th Avenue, where the police took him into custody. And when they took him into custody, when they arrested him, he's the individual that had .357 handgun, the one that had 4 shots in it that had been expended. Same number that Patsy Jones told you that she heard. There's no reason to believe that just because her teeth are bad doesn't mean her hearing is bad. There's no indication of that. There's no indication that just because her teeth are bad, her eyesight was not there. It was all there. And the same thing with Officer David Goya. Just because some guy tried to run him down doesn't mean he can't remember. It doesn't mean he can't see. It doesn't mean he can't hear. They both agreed that it was 4 shots. That's what Patsy Jones told you. And they take the defendant into custody, and that gun is there. And one of the interesting parts about it is that the gun the hammer is actually over a live round. In case he was trying to fire more shots, he just wasn't able to get that shot off for whatever reason. Maybe he had the strap from his man purse gone, and we don't know exactly, but we know the man purse was involved because it took a round. Take a look at the man purse. There's a shot that went through. So it wasn't like David Godia panicked and he was shooting all over the place. He was shooting at this individual. He hit him once, and he hit the man purse another time, and then you saw the other rounds that were there. The side of the building, yes, he did hit a car. But the evidence showed that none of his rounds went across the street, past a field, and into the eaves of that trailer. Even their expert told you that that was impossible. Yet, they presented that to you because that's the reality that they want to create. They want you to believe that because they told you. You know? That's what they want you to have, is faith in what they tell you. But what does the law tell you? What does the jury instructions tell you? Well, one of the things that the jury instructions tell you is that, and it was the second paragraph, it's that it's your duty to determine what the facts are in the case by determining what actually happened. Determine the facts only from the evidence produced in court. When I say evidence, I mean the testimony of witnesses and the exhibits introduced in court. You should not guess about anything. You're not here to help either side. You're not here to say, well, yeah, but you know, counsel, the defendant said, intimated that, you know, this, you know, the other shots could have been fired somewhere else. You're not supposed to speculate about that. That's what the judge told you. What you have here is a gun with 4 expended rounds, the defendant's gun, and what you have is 2 people saying that there were 4 rounds that were fired. You are gun, and what you have is 2 people saying that there were 4 rounds that were fired. You are not to guess about any facts. And in fact, it tells you here that what the lawyers say is not evidence. So that's one of the things that the law tells you. And it is your duty to follow these laws and these instructions. Obviously, when you see that one applies and one doesn't apply, well then you pick and choose as to which one may or may not apply. And the standard that you apply is called the beyond a reasonable doubt standard. Again, it's on page 3. You have it. It's already been read no less than an hour ago, so no need to follow. It just says proof beyond a reasonable doubt is proof that leaves you firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt. And it bears putting up there that it says there are very few things in this world that we know with absolute certainty. And in criminal cases, the law does not require proof that overcomes every doubt. If, based on your consideration of the evidence, you are firmly convinced that the defendant is guilty of the crime, in this case it would be the crimes charged, you must find the defendant guilty. That's how you apply it. Being firmly convinced. The state does not have to overcome every doubt. In other words, when they want you to speculate about whether or not the gun has been fired, the state is not required to overcome every doubt, including speculative doubt. The facts were presented to you, and the jury instructions guide you that you are not to go into this fanciful world of magicians or this fanciful world where that view of reality is without resort to the truth. You need to decide this case based on the facts that were presented in court. And so we know that there is a jury instruction that tells you that what expert witnesses tell you, for example, such as Mr. Green, the person who wanted to tell you about his vacation, somebody like that, you are to consider what they tell you. But you don't have to accept everything they tell you. You can accept some things, you can reject some things. It is up to you to decide what their testimony is in light of everything else and in the light of how they testified. So, what are the charged offenses here. There are two. There's first-degree murder involving Anthony Hawley, and then there's also the attempted first-degree murder of Officer David Goyer. And the judge has read those to you and indicated to you that the first element that the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt is that the defendant engaged in conduct, intending or knowing that the conduct would cause the death of a person who the defendant knows is a law enforcement officer. And the thing to point out there is that it says the defendant engaged in conduct intending or knowing. That's in the disjunctive. When you start talking to you, well, he didn't intend to do this or didn't intend to do that, but did he know? That's a different standard. Knowing something is different than intending. Did he know that a gun, if produced, that has bullets in it, if a gun has bullets in it and you pull the trigger, is something going to come out? And if it hits somebody, did he know that it could kill somebody? Well, everybody knows that. So did he engage in conduct knowing that his conduct would cause the death of a person? Sure. You start shooting at somebody, that's what's going to happen. And did he know he was a law enforcement officer? There's no doubt about that. There's uniforms all over the place. There's police cars all over the place. And number two, the law enforcement officer was in the line of duty. It may have been President's Day, but David Goyer was in the line of duty. And the defendant caused the death of a law enforcement officer. He did shoot Officer Anthony Hawley. Shot him right in the side of the face. That bullet was through and through, and it killed him. Officer Hawley, it can't be said that perhaps if treatment would have been rendered, that he would have survived. No, there's no indication of that. What Patsy Jones told you was that when she got out of the car and she came around and looked down, she saw Officer Anthony Hawley trying to get up. And you heard from the medical examiner that a person can take 1 or 2 steps, even if they suffer this type of injury. He was trying to get up. This incompetent officer was perhaps still trying to get away. This incompetent officer, maybe he was trying to draw his gun, but he was trying to get up at that point. He was able to move his head. He looked up at Patsy Jones, and he started spitting out blood. So was this a law enforcement officer? No doubt about that. Did the defendant kill him? Yeah. He's the person that's firing at him before Officer David Goyer even returned fire at him when he was already near the side of the house. By their own admission, there was a time span, a period before when Officer Goyer ran. They made a big deal of how Officer Goyer ran. Well, you've seen Officer Goyer, no disrespect, but doesn't look from seeing him walk up to the witness stand that he's the fastest runner. So it took some time for him to get from the Kia over to 60th Avenue in Oregon. And it was during that time the defendant dispatched or killed Officer Anthony Hawley and attempted to kill Officer Goyer, and then started to run away, took another shot, went around the corner, and then took his last shot. Now, 2, attempted first-degree murder. Well, attempted first-degree murder requires also 3 elements. The defendant attempted to cause the death of a person. Well, when you're citing somebody, the other officer, one officer, especially after you killed one, you pretty much know that's what you're doing. And that he engaged in conduct knowing, intending, or knowing that the conduct would cause the death of a person who the defendant knows is a law enforcement officer. Of course he was a law enforcement officer. Of course it was the defendant. Of course he had a gun in his hand. And he was citing it. He already killed one. What's another one? And the law enforcement officer was in the line of duty. It was a try. That's why it was an attempt. It wasn't a successful try, but it was a try nonetheless, and that's what the attempt is. And so, under these instructions, the defendant is guilty of that crime. But there has been some evidence that was presented for you to consider. There was evidence for you to consider. And that was in this form, if you will, of this defense that I was telling you about. The one that's a faith-based defense in a magical, mystical sort of reality that they want to create irrespective of the facts here. And in order to better understand this defense, I want to talk to you about an individual by the name of Lorenzo Quijano. And Lorenzo Quijano was an older gentleman. And this gentleman was 75 years old, maybe 80. He was an older gentleman who began reading, and he read a lot. And he began reading all these books about being a knight and about how they do good things in the name of somebody, and they go out and they fight, but it's always on the side of right. And so, as he got older, he started to believe that the era was that of knight-errantry. And he believed that he could partake of it. And he decided that he would do something about it. He decided that he would go and get this armor his great-grandfather had up there. And he brought it down, you know what time was it? Anyway, shined it up, and it was very pretty. And it looked good, and it fit him. But there was a problem. This armor didn't have a helmet or a visor. So he went about constructing one of paper mache. And he put it together to the point that it actually looked like the armor. But he needs a sword, so he went out and found a sword and made it sharp. Now he had this sword. Now he had this helmet. But before he did that, he also realized that a knight is a horse. It was this old tag that he had out there in the corral, and he decided to use that horse. And he gave it just a wonderful name, because a knight can't go out there without a horse with a good name. So he gave the name Rocinante. What he was doing is creating a reality that exists just like they did. So he named the horse Rocinante. But if he's going to go out and fight, if he's going to be a knight, if he's going to do all of these good deeds, he has to have somebody to do them for. And there was a lass, a young girl, that was down the block, and her name was Alonzo Lorenzo. But he's not going to use that name. Again, he's got to create his reality. Create another reality from what he has there. And he gave her the name of Dulcinea del Tolosa. So he's got all of that. And he's got the helmet. But he's got to test this helmet, even in his reality that he's now created, which is fictionalized. It's in his head. It's without regard to the true events that are going on in his life. Takes that sword, raises it over his head, brings it down, and slices that helmet. That are going on in his life, takes that sword, raises it over his head, brings it down, and slices that helmet right in half. Well, ain't working so good, as they say out in the street, with regard to that helmet. So what does he do? He's not going to be deterred just because he has a setback. Just like there's a setback here, he's going to continue on with this alter reality. And what he does is, again, he constructs a helmet, and a visor the same way that he did before. He brings it up, it looks great, it fits, almost ready to go. He's going to test it. Got to test it again. Raises that sword, holds it up, have to bring it down. You have to have faith. You have to have faith in your beliefs. Don't test it. Just like here, don't test what they presented to you. Just have faith in what they're telling you. And well, what does this individual do? Well, to complete the picture, one of the things is that he's got to give himself a name so he can go out and he can do these good deeds. So he can create his own reality like they wanted to create for you here. And he gave himself the name of Don Quixote de la Mancha. And so now he's ready. He's got the horse, Rocinante. He's got Dulcinea del Toboso. He's got his armor. He's got it all. He's taken parts of reality and created something totally different. A magical world, just like they want you to go into this magical world. And when he goes out, he wants people to believe in him. That's part of it. And he does come across a guy who's having problems with his wife. That's really what it comes down to, who's out riding the donkey. And he convinces this guy to go with him. His name is Sancho Panza. Just like they're trying to convince you about this alter reality. Sancho Panza is skeptical, but give it a shot. That's what they want you to do. At least give it a shot. And so what he does is they go out and they start looking at things. And they start talking about what they're going to do. And at one point, in terms of what's going out there, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza crest a hill. You get up on this hill and you can just see the expanse out there. And you can see really far. And one of the things that they're able to see is this cloud of dust. And then there's another cloud of dust that's coming together. Don Quixote sees something. What he sees is a situation where he can become this hero. And he thinks it's two armies coming together. When in fact, all it is one flock of sheep crossing the road, the other flock of sheep crossing the road the other way. And Sancho Panza tells him that. Hey, this is just nothing but sheep. What are you doing? No, I see something different here. I see monsters, not monsters, I see these two armies. And so he rushes on down, he's got his lance out, he's going down there, and of course he starts injuring the sheep, he starts hitting things, and what ends up happening is that the shepherds, they're not going to put up with that, start throwing rocks at him. And they get him off his horse, they injure the horse, and they injure him, and they bring him down, and old Sancho Panza bringing up the rear, and he said, I told you that they were sheep. And he said, you just don't understand. You don't see things like they should be. And that's what they're telling you in this particular case. For example, one of the things that they told you in opening statement, one of the things that they told you was, in plain English, ShotSpotter uses microphones to pinpoint. First of all, to let us hear the shots, and second of all, to pinpoint the location of the shots. We can listen to them. We can count them. We can pretty much see them. See? In their reality, based on ShotSpotter, they want you to think that in that altered reality that they're presenting to you, that you can see the shots. Let's talk about ShotSpotter. From the top, under optimum circumstances, for that 1 mile that it covers, it's only 80% accurate. If everything is as good as it's going to get, it's only 80% accurate, which means it's 20% wrong. To start with, is that scientific, objective evidence? If you start at medical care with the fact that the doctor is going to be 20% wrong, is that something that is acceptable? Of course it isn't. And that's science. not something that's 20% wrong. And what else do we know? Well, that area of error gets even bigger when you look at the fact that if something's out of the coverage area, well, if it's out of the coverage area, the accuracy even goes further. It goes down even further. So instead of 80% accurate, you're now what, 60%? And here, this killing, whether they want to make it any other way, was at 60th Avenue in Oregon. It was not north of Missouri. There's no doubt about it. They may want you to think that. They may want you to get to that 80%, but it is not. There's nothing they can do about it. They may want to alter the reality all they want, but it is not something that they can change. But you know what? They want you to see it that way. That's what they want you to see. Well, again, that's a problem for them. The other problem for them is that 4 of these sensors were not working. Even if it was going to happen within the coverage area, 4 of the sensors weren't working. To the point where their own experts said that this scientific objective evidence was crippled. It wasn't really worth a darn. It wasn't working at all. Can't even get the time right. They got the time as 3:29 in the afternoon. So what is it? What else? Well, it can't even get anything right because the sensors aren't even there. Well, they tell you what, one of the sensors could hear something. Well, where's the 4th sensor that was out? This expert can't even tell you which 4th sensor was out. And so if you take a look at Exhibit 367, they tell you about sensor number 2, sensor number 11, and sensor number 15. Who's to say that's not one of the ones that was out? Do you have any confidence, based on the way he testified, based on the way that system was running that way, that one of the sensors wasn't the ones that were on? Any confidence whatsoever in that system? No, in the reality they want you to, but 4 of the sensors were out. They can't even tell you which other one was out. And he says, I did my computations with regard to sensor number 3, a sensor that had been vandalized by the homeowner. It wasn't working, but it worked for him. I want you to believe that reality. It worked for him. I could hear the pulses. Didn't record anything, but I could still hear the pulses so that I could do my calculus or advanced medium calculus or whatever the heck you call it. It's calculus. I wanted to impress you with how good he was at putting this mathematically together. But there's a problem. There's still a problem. He actually went into this system who initially said it was a firecracker. Again, there's a problem with that. He went in there and changed it to gunshots. And when there's a record of it, he says, I was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. That's an individual who's trying to sell the system to you. Maybe not so much for this case, maybe for this case, maybe for the system itself. But this system now is no longer in the coverage area. We have 4 sensors that are out. Only 3/4 of the system is working, and it's crippled by his own admission. So, what, is it 10% effective? 20% effective? Is that the objective scientific evidence? Is that the reality that you want to follow? Is that the path that you want to take to follow this defendant? Is that what you want to do and say, aha, there you go, reasonable doubt, I can base it on this. And that's the term they use. Scientific, objective evidence, something that, what, 90% wrong? Is that the kind of, for example, the medical treatment that you would want? And one of the things that he didn't want to admit was that even when he did it, in Exhibit 378, this is what he found. When he read the data and the shots, firecracker events came out, this is the address that he came up with. 6028 was Maryland Avenue. That's 1.5 miles. And the way the system is supposed to operate is the officers hear the dot or see the dot, and they run to it. Well, if the officers went to that place, they'd have been 1.5 miles away. What confidence can you possibly have in that reality? What confidence can you possibly have in this system that they touted to you as a bastion of truth, some light that you can follow? Well, if you follow it, you would end up wrong, just like the officers would. And not only that, they marked it as 2 separate occasions. 2 separate firecracker events. This was one of them. And look at this one. This was at 5950 West Missouri. And what's even more damning for them about this is that when this system was originally looked at in Exhibit 380, the address was 6022 West Maryland. 6028 West Maryland. They can't even get the same address right. The other one, well, that one was 5950 West Missouri. The updated one, 380 was 5939 West Missouri. This is on the south side of the street, whereas this right here is on the north side of the street. So let's all get in line and follow them to this area, because that's where their defense is. That's where they want you to believe that the shooting happened. Let's all follow them there. If they say that this is the scientific evidence, is that they stood up here and told you that, if that's the scientific evidence, follow them there. And what would you come up with? Nothing. You would come up with nothing, because nothing happened there that's important to this case. Who's to say there wasn't an event there? Given how poorly that system was working, who's to say that something didn't happen there? He couldn't even tell you that, because he was moving things around. And when he was asked, hey, did you know the location before? Somebody asked him, did you know the location before? No, I didn't. And then when he was pressed, wait a minute, isn't it true that you had a conversation with defense counsel? Yeah. And isn't it true that he discussed with you where he thought it was? Yeah, but I just didn't know where the location was. He's just trying to maybe slant it a little bit in favor of this system.
Mr. Martinez, let's go ahead and take our lunch break. It's noon time, so we're going to go ahead and take our lunch recess. We're going to come back at 1:30. Until then, remember the admonition, and I'll see you at 1:30. Thank you. Please be seated.
Yes, no.
Hang on for a second. Do we need to? Do we have an issue we probably have to take up? Yeah. Okay. No, I forgot I was supposed to talk to the lawyers first, and I just sent you out. I apologize. So we're going to have you go back. Let me talk to the lawyers, and then we'll have you come back. Sorry about that. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the jury. Okay, please be seated. Failed to get Mr. Hulsey, I think, was the issue. So let's go ahead and get Mr. Hulsey. We'll wait. Let's wait a couple minutes so that let him get set, so he doesn't have to come right in and have the jury come right in on top of him.
A little close.
Don't worry about it. It happens. We got a lot of moving parts. Okay, Mr. Hulsey's here. Any issues from anybody's perspective we need to talk about before we bring the jury back in?
Oh, thank you.
Reeves, anything from your
No, sir.
perspective? Mr. Martinez, I'm expecting, and let me check with Mr. Reeves, if Mr. Martinez finishes before the next planned break, which I expect to happen, are you ready to go right into your closing argument? Okay, we don't need to take a break. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get the jury.
Always happens just once a try.
Yeah, it always happens.
Please be seated, everyone. Let the record reflect the presence of the jury panel, defendant, and counsel. Okay, now we're ready. Sorry about that. I had forgotten that I had promised to talk to them before we were going to start, but now we're ready to go. We left off with the state's closing argument, so that's where we will pick up. Mr. Martinez, you may continue.
Before announced, we were talking about this bastion of scientific ingenuity known as ShotSpotter. And we left talking about its shortcomings. One of the other shortcomings that ShotSpotter has is this issue. And again, when do we hear the 11th? When do we hear the shot from Brian's gun? It is the 11th shot. This is part of the scientific, objective evidence that will help you decide the merits of the case on the facts. If you can't even distinguish between a 357 and a .40 caliber, how can you possibly say which is the 11th shot? The only place that you can say it's the 11th shot is in this Neverland, this created world that they want you to go into. Because according to their own expert, this system on that date was limited even to the point that it was an absolute hindrance rather than a help. It would have sent the officer somewhere else. The dispatcher thought it was firecrackers. Rather than dealing with the killing, they're dealing with a firecracker incident. It was a hindrance, and there's no way that anybody can tell you which shots are the defendants and which shots are Officer Gladius. Their own expert admitted that. So this system that is being held out as scientific objective evidence really is nothing more than a hindrance in this case. Because if you look at what it really produced in this case, it produced a different location. It would have sent officers somewhere else. The other thing that is important about this system and that we have to consider at this point is this issue involving the time. And I've already talked about the problem with the time, and this is exhibit number 362. I want to talk to you about this in a different sort of vein. And it has to do with the candor of the witness when discussing his particular system. Throughout this whole endeavor, when he was, and I'm talking about Paul Green, when he was testifying, every time, even questions from the jury, he would go on and on and on, not trying to answer questions. He would answer everything under the sun when he was being asked a question. That person you saw was never at a loss for words when he was being asked a question, whether it was from the defense counsel, whether it was from you. He went on and on. But when he was being questioned about the time, you saw his eyes when he saw that. Did he ever, this verbose individual, that couldn't stop himself from talking, as I told you before, or you remember, he wanted to talk about his vacation? This person did not have the candor to say to you, no, oops, Angelo. That's another example of how my machine doesn't work. Well, actually, that's another example of this machine that's broken but doesn't work further. Why didn't he do that? He was on the witness stand. You saw how much he volunteered, and that shows you not only is the system something that you can't rely on, it's not scientific, But the person, the messenger, is somebody that you really can't trust as you sit here. The credibility of witnesses' instruction has been read to you, and it talks about the manner the person talks, what other evidence is there. That individual talked on and on ad nauseum. But when it came to this, he was quiet as a church mouse. He's sitting there, not a word. And perhaps people began to believe this Neverland. No one asked about it. And what did he do? Well, he swallowed it. He just sat there, quiet as a church mouse, didn't address this. Because, again, that's another limitation on his testimony. What he should have done, and what he did throughout his whole presentation, was continually talk. And we would have known that this was wrong, too. This is 8 hours after 7 o'clock. 7, it's not a 15, this is military time. And the reason that I know that it's military time, and that you know it's military time, is if you take a look at the other exhibits that are involved in this particular case. Exhibit 378. See the time there? 07/29/20. So it isn't like even in 2014. It isn't like the system that he was running, the program, whatever he was running, doesn't recognize a 7. It did recognize a 7. But then he comes in with this. It doesn't really have anything to do with this. If you look at it that way, how is it that the system can tell you in 378 that it's 7:29 in the morning? 0700, that's 7 in the morning. How can it tell you that? But yet, when he's going to do his mathematical calculations and going to tell you how many hundredths of a second are between each shot, he comes up with a different time. Same machine, isn't it? There's no indication anywhere that anything was changed with that machine. There's no indication that the operator was in there changing the times. How comfortable are you that this are even the times? There is something drastically wrong with that machine that they're holding up for you like this golden beacon for you to aspire and rise to. They're holding that out to you, but that machine on 2 different occasions, at different times, and even in 2014, you can tell the difference between 7 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. All that? Is that really scientific, objective evidence? Or are you going to speculate, which you're told not to do, and say, you know what? He was such a nice guy. He wanted to tell us about his vacation. Let's give him a break and say, heck, it's only 8 hours. What's the big deal? That's a work day for most people. Maybe it was a work day. Or maybe, as he inputted that it was gunshots, maybe somebody inputted that time. We don't know, but it's certainly different. And if you take a look at the other items that you have there, when we talk about the dispatcher times, let's take a look at those. You will see that the dispatcher is able to keep time. Exhibit number 361. See that? This is the one we told you. See the time? 7:29 in the morning. Glendale Police Department didn't have any trouble telling time. And the only thing that's showing up there is that somebody on April 8th of 2014 is trying to label that as gunshots. Fingerprint of somebody trying to change something here. And that's what they want you to believe is scientific evidence. It's not what it is. It is a failed system being used to take you to this area where the facts are not considered and don't matter. Only the word of somebody is what they want you to consider. They want you to have faith in that word and ignore all of these other things. Some of the other scientific evidence that they brought for you involved ballistics. And one of the terms that individual used was magical. said something about the bullets not having these magical qualities. If you remember, Don Quixote and Sancho had many adventures, but one of them that talks to this particular issue about the magic involves what everyone's probably familiar with and identifies with this particular story, novel. And it involves the windmills. Early on, the pair going along and they see about 40 windmills. And Don Quixote, seeing the windmills, being eager to get into it, trying to do good deeds for Dulcinea del Toboso, begins to charge and says, those are monsters. Those are monsters, and I must slay the monsters, which is akin to what I guess they're trying to tell you here. And he starts charging down, and Sancho comes up on that donkey, following behind, saying, no, those are windmills. And Don Quixote goes down, and as the leaves are turning, he sticks his lance in one of them, the lance breaks, he goes up a little bit, he comes down on his horse, and he are hurt. So when Sancho finally reaches him and says, why did you do that? Why is it that you did that? He said, Sancho, it's magic. Something like Jacko Swanapa was talking to you about. They want you to believe in magic. And Don Quixote said, these actually were monsters. But the necromancers, or the magicians, changed them into windmills to take away my glory. But you have to see that it's actually the magic that did it. Just like Jacko Swanapa talked about magic. And that ballistics is not a science of magic. That bullets, once in flight, will fly true until gravity brings them down and until the wind stops them. That's what he was telling you. Except that you also heard statements like this that were debunked by their own expert, Jacko Swanapa. You were told, in an opening statement, I told you that Officer Goya was in a complete panic. And that's shown by the wild pattern of his shots as he's shooting. 2 of his shots hit the car. 1 of his shots hits the house. 2 of his shots hit trailers down here. 3 to 4 blocks away. Really? Is that what the evidence has shown in this case? Not the speculation, not the word of somebody. I was told for you in the beginning. So perhaps you could get on the train and get to their destination. That's what you were told. But their own expert, when he saw the pattern, when he saw the strike on that trailer that was down the street, across 59th Avenue, past the empty lot, underneath the eaves, when he saw it, if you don't want to believe Detective John Bustos, don't believe him. Because he told you also, the reason I didn't investigate that is because that was angled. And he showed you that. It was impossible for it to have come from Officer Goya's gun. Well, they didn't believe him. They bring Jacko Swanapa, their expert, the guy that's an expert in reconstruction, a guy that charges money for it. That individual came in here, said, you know what? Gotta tell you, I'm not going to Neverland with you. I'm not going to this land of odd that you want me to go to. I don't want to go to this magic land. I'm telling you right now, he said, I haven't seen that photograph before. I wasn't asked to go there. Looking at that photograph, that is an angled shot that was north and south, not east and west, which is what required. Their own witness is telling you, this is not magic. Their own witness is telling you that what is being presented or given to you to look at is really, really problematic. He didn't use that word, Jacko Swanapa, but he just said that was not a perpendicular shot, which would have been required for Officer Goya to do that. Officer Goya was not down 59th Avenue, north or south, for him to make that. It's going to happen. And when asked about the shot to the trailer behind that, the one that was hitting the eaves, he said, almost out of frustration, he said, you know, I keep telling you, bullets don't have these magic qualities. They fly straight, they hit something, then they angle off a little bit. But they don't go up over a trailer. They then continue that way, come down, and then continue on. They just don't do that. But yet they told you in this two shots hit trailers down here 3 to 4 blocks away. Their own expert says no. Don't believe those statements. If you don't want to believe the state's expert, or the state's detective, boom. Well, the other thing that they told you with regard to this was that the objective scientific evidence will show that the lone shot disregards that there are 4 casings in that gun by Bryant was fired while he had turned the corner and run down this direction, down the street, and then fired down into this direction as he lay on the ground, having been shot by Officer Goyder. Keep in mind that that requires an individual to be something like this. Something like that. Remember, he was shot in the knee. That's what they're telling you. So, that means that the shot that he has to fire at Officer Goyder is either, if it's straight, is going to be 2 to 3, what is it? Depending on how tall he is, 2, 3 feet off the ground. If it's going to be straight, isn't it? But other than that, if it's going to shoot up like that, it's going to be continuing up like that. And is it going to be down at the corner such that this shot that's going up, is then somehow going to make a 90-degree angled turn and then straight to the wall? Is that the way bullets fly? Isn't the way. And this, of course, is dependent on your belief of shot spotter. How do we know? If we rely on shot spotter, how many shots were fired from a 357? It's just as likely that the 4 shots from a 357 are there as the shots from the .40 caliber. They can't tell you. That technology can't tell you anything. But that technology does tell you that you should corroborate your evidence with the witnesses. In this case, the witnesses, Patsy, one of them being Patsy Jones, said she saw and heard 4 shots, the same thing with Officer Goyder. So, and then you have 4 that are spent. And you come in with a system such as this, who doesn't distinguish anything, who is broken, and then you are told this. How could you possibly believe anything like that? How could you possibly believe anything like that? What you can believe is what their expert tells you, that when a bullet strikes dead on like this, that's a perpendicular shot, which requires the muzzle uttered or sent out the bullet to be at a perpendicular angle, if that's the correct term, to the wall in this particular case. And he was not going to be swayed by that, from that. Oh yeah, maybe it hit the tree or whatever, but then if it hits the tree, it starts to tumble. And then it isn't going to hit down. So, one of the other things that Jumbo Swanapel was asked about was whether or not he had given an opinion that just because somebody, Officer Hawley, hadn't pulled their gun out, that he could say that Officer Hawley was standing there just watching, bending around while the officer was this over here. I said, no, I never gave that opinion. But yet, that was offered to you in court. This is what we were told, what you were told. What else will the objective and scientific evidence show you? The medical examiner will tell you that the bullet hit Officer Hawley went in his right side, out his left side of his face. The shot went in and out on an even plane. The conclusion is Officer Hawley was not ducking, not trying to get out of the way of the shot, but was hit unexpectedly as he stood watching Brian run. Watch Spot run. Yeah. Police officer, there's a gun out there. Shots have already been fired. Another officer's already running. Standing there. What an incompetent rube that officer was, right? Right? That's exactly what they're telling you. Exactly it. But when Jumbo Swanapel, their own expert, was asked about it, he said, no, that's not it at all. I never said that, and you can't tell that at all. Of course, in this created reality, Yes, maybe. Some of you might want to believe that that's true. But you're not allowed to speculate. The judge has already told you that. You are to decide the facts from the evidence that's presented, which is the testimony and the items that are introduced as evidence. There is nothing that was introduced that indicated that at all. It's nothing but speculation. Quite frankly, since he's not here to defend himself, it's a little bit harsh on that police officer, just a tad harsh. One of the things that this expert did tell you was that if the items had been recovered from the head of Officer Holly, that there may be an opportunity to tell which of the two guns fired that shot. But he never said that it was the .357, and he never said it was the .40 caliber gun that actually fired it. He never said that. He said he couldn't say that. And in fact, we talked a lot about the size of the items and how small they were, and that perhaps they could. But he also said that even larger items than that, much larger items than that, don't have any identifying characteristics, and the size doesn't really matter that much. It could be larger, and you still couldn't tell. But one of the things that he did tell you that was very important in this case is that he could tell you from his expertise that the .40 caliber bullet, the gold dot, the one that was being fired by Officer David Goya, is designed not to fragment. What he told you is that that jacket, the copper-looking thing around the lead, even though it's a hollow point, is bonded onto the lead. And it's bonded on in such a manner that when it goes and strikes somebody, it is not going to fragment. That's what it's designed to do. That's what the bullet is designed to do. On the other hand, the Independence round is not bonded like that. It's not bonded at all. And that one is also thinner in construction such that it does fragment when it does strike an individual. From that, certainly one of the conclusions that you can draw from their own expert is that all this big issue that you had about the fragments, based just on what he told you, is that fragments came from that .357. And one of the issues that arose is, what do you do with that evidence when something is not collected? And fortunately, in this case, you have guidance from the court as to how you consider it, because it would almost be unfair to send you back and say, wow, there's this issue with the fragments, without giving you guidance. And you indicated that you would follow the jury instructions, and it is your duty to do so. And the jury instructions tell you on page 7 how you consider that evidence and what you do with it. And it tells you that if you find that the state has lost, destroyed, or failed to preserve, it's a failed to preserve evidence, who's on who with a medical examiner. It isn't like he was trying to hide anything. What he told you is, in my experience, having done these thousands of autopsies, being involved in cases where there are fragments and there has been a shooting, I determined that because of the size, this was not important scientifically. It wasn't like he sat down with John Bustos, as they allege, and said, hey, let's get together and do something about that. And they did allege that there was some sort of collusion going on there. But it does say, weigh the explanation, if any. There is an explanation. He wanted to save the family the trauma of having to cut up this individual's face. That's what he said. Given for the loss or unavailability of the evidence, if you find that such explanation is inadequate, how adequate is that? You see, he was thinking of the family. It wasn't like he was colluding with that, with Officer John Bustos. Then you may draw an inference of favorable, unfavorable to the state. Only after you decide whether or not the explanation is adequate or inadequate are you then going to draw any inferences. And in this case, there is no unfavorable inference to be drawn to the state. There isn't, because what is the explanation? He sat up there and told you, hey, I didn't talk to the detective. Of course I didn't talk to the detective. I made that scientific decision myself. I'm the person that's responsible for that. And as I told you over and over, I didn't want to make a face. That's what he said. And I couldn't find the particles without doing it. It's important to know that you are to consider the defense and what they told you about that. They told you an opening statement. Officer Bustos, who was in charge of this case, attended the autopsy, and he told the medical examiner, that's John Booth, when the medical examiner asked, what do you want me to do with the small fragments? He said, leave them alone. Don't take them out. Is that what the evidence showed? Is that what the evidence showed? But they want you to believe that. And they want you to believe that because the instruction talks about whether or not an explanation is adequate. Certainly, it would have been inadequate for the officer to do that. He doesn't have any medical training. Just like Jocko Swanapel, he can't go on in there and say, do this, do that. That's beyond his expertise. And if it's beyond his expertise, then he shouldn't be telling them that. But the detective said, no, I have nothing to do with that. And the medical examiner said, I was the one that made that decision. So they turn around and they tell you this because they want to bootstrap onto that jury instruction. Again, they want to take you to this area, to this arena, to a place that ain't their own reality. They want to take you to a place that's not considerate of the facts in this case. They want you to consider their statements as if they were facts. They want you to consider their inaccuracies as if they were facts. And when they're brought out into the sunlight, they want you to say, he says, that's okay. That's okay. No, it's not okay. The judge tells you, or at least the jury instructions tell you, that you are to decide this case from the facts that you determine. And the facts can only be determined from what comes from the witness stand in the form of testimony and in the form of any exhibits that are admitted, such as Exhibit 362. All the wrong times are. Oh, now you're allowed to ponder this. Are you going to go to this other land where being created in spite of what was presented in this court? Are you going to go to this land and not look at the evidence? Are you going to follow this illogical path? It requests that instead of following this illogical path, you follow the jury instructions. And once you do that, you return the verdicts. And those verdicts are first-degree murder, guilty verdict on that, a guilty verdict of attempted first-degree murder. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Why don't we clear out the exhibits for Reeves, so clear those out. Reeves, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just one second, Your Honor, I'm sorry.
Good afternoon. You know, one of the great things about being Don Quixote and Man of La Mancha is that there's an explanation for your writings. In Miguel de Cervantes, when he wrote Don Quixote, why did he write it? He'd been in prison for 7 years by his government wrongfully. He wrote it as a protest against his wrongful conviction. A very interesting analogy to use, and I appreciate it. Today I'm going to explain to you magic. Not that hard. But the great thing about magic is when you hear the explanation, suddenly you get it. Let's see, what time did the report come in to the police station? 7:29. The report police station. 7:29. The report comes in. Now, the system, when it was reanalyzed, reported it according to what time? GPS time.
Objection,
Synchronized.
arguing facts, not in evidence.
Hold on. Overruled, he can argue inferences. Overruled.
This was the testimony of Mr. Green. GPS evidence, GPS time synchronized to the atomic clock. 8 hours difference. 8 plus 7, 15. Magic. Magic explained by the report that comes into the police station. What time did it come in? 7:29. The purpose of this, Exhibit 362, wasn't magic. The purpose was to show you how far apart the shots were. That's the purpose. And that piece of magic correlates directly with the sounds from 3 different microphones. 3 different microphones that you heard the sounds from. It isn't that you couldn't hear the sounds, you heard the sounds, you know the microphones were working, and what were you told about the microphones? It's not like a string of Christmas lights. One goes out, the whole string doesn't go out. Microphone 2 is working perfect, you heard it. It picked up 14 shots. 11 at the beginning, a pause, and 3. Now what do we know about this gunfight, if you can call it a gunfight? We know that there were 11 shots at the beginning and 3 at the end, because Officer Goodyear ran off behind or by, he wasn't sure if he was behind it or by it, by the Chrysler that was across the street. And at the Chrysler that was across the street, they found 3 bullet casings. 3 bullet casings behind that car. 3. So we have 11 here and 1 plus 3. Okay? We had 13 shots from Officer Goya, undisputed. There wasn't a word about the fact that he didn't shoot 13 shots. Then we have the microphone picking up 1 more shot. It's not magic. Reality. See, this isn't faith-based hocus pocus. My faith in this situation is in you. That you're
Objection,
gonna-
arguing personal beliefs, my take.
Let's be careful about that line of argument, please.
The faith in the system is in you, the jury, that you will have heard the evidence and that you'll sort through the claims of magic and that you'll see the reality. Perception is not always reality. Now, since I've been called man of the mancha, let me make another remark about me. Just using me as an example. If you look at me straight on, you perceive I might be a man with a full head of hair. But if you see me from a different angle, you might know that I'm slightly challenged. Perception depends on your point of view. Perception can be altered by your point of view and by the things that you want to believe based upon your own personal beliefs. The Officer Goyde cannot perceive of a situation in which he would have shot his partner. Nobody wants to perceive of that situation. Later, he's describing the situation, and he can't perceive that he might have fired that shot. But the fact is, there's no evidence to support all these other shots that he thinks he heard. We'll talk about Patsy and how reliable she was, but I'm sure that you remember her testimony. She had a real straight story when Mr. Martinez was asking her questions. And to me, she couldn't keep her story straight.
Objection, arguing his beliefs to me.
Overruled.
You see, the state could have reconstructed this scene. They could have asked for a reanalysis of the shot spotter information. It's their system. It's Glendale's system. The reanalysis is included in the annual fee.
Objection, arguing facts not in evidence.
Overruled.
But for me to get the reanalysis, $5,250 and $600 an hour to get what they should have done. I did make statements to you in opening. Statements that you saw that I made, I stand by. And I stand by that the evidence showed you that those statements are correct. We'll get into what was said in opening in just a minute. But what I did promise you in the opening was that I would show you hard scientific facts. I would show you that the hard evidence doesn't support this theory of the state. For example, this new theory that we just heard, that my client chased Officer Goyde over here someplace and fired straight on. I don't know where that new evidence comes from. What Mr. Swanepoel was asked was, is it a perpendicular line from here on Oregon across the street? Well, yeah, it's a perpendicular line. So if the shot was fired perpendicular to the wall, it might have been fired from over here. But what Mr. Swanepoel couldn't say was where the shot was fired from. He didn't know. Oh. Well, now I killed the system. Mr. Swanepoel did not say that the shot was fired from this position to this wall. He couldn't say that. Mr. Martinez just tried to make that inference, but Mr. Swanepoel didn't say that. He said if there was a shot perpendicular to a wall, it would have to come from it. But what we know is that there was a bullet found under this tree. We know that there was a mark on this house that nobody tested. Mr. Swanepoel didn't test that. Neither did Mr. Polkowski, the state's expert. They weren't asked to test that. There was a bullet slug found under a tree with wood fiber on it. That's what we know about item 30. Item 30 wasn't tested for DNA by the state. They withdrew it. They gave it to the lab, they withdrew it. Don't test it. And why not test it? Because you don't test what you don't want to know. I promised you that I would show you that ShotSpotter picked up 14 shots. It did. You heard it. See, this isn't magic. You heard it. Compare notes when you go back there. Ask if there's anybody who only heard 13. Count them. Listen to it again. 14 shots were picked up by the system. I told you that the medical examiner found fragments in the head. of Officer Hulsey when he was doing the autopsy. And first of all, let me say, I did not say one disparaging thing about Officer Hulsey. Not one time did I call him any of the names that have been accredited to me calling him. I did not disparage that young man's name once. Officer Hulsey was killed in a horrible accident. And that's what it was, a horrible accident. But I didn't call him names. The medical examiner said he saw fragments in the head. You saw the x-ray, you saw them. You asked questions about them. Could have just been shadows? No, they were metal fragments seen on the x-ray. You have a special instruction. Not given in every case, because they don't lose evidence in every case. That special instruction tells you what to do in the event that the state loses evidence. And in the event the state loses evidence, you don't give them the benefit of it. The benefit goes to the person that's supposed to receive the benefit of the doubt. And in fact, the instruction tells you that once you make that assumption to the benefit of the defendant, that might rise to a position where there is a lack of probable cause. I mean, a lack of reasonable proof. And where that proof is lacking, then you're entitled to find Brian Hulsey not guilty. Simply based upon the state's lack of preserving the evidence that could have proven Brian Hulsey not guilty. And the one thing that they didn't contradict is that those tiny little fragments can contain evidence. A tiny little fragment. This is not a fragment. This is not one of the fragments. This is simply a demonstrative piece. Give you an example of how big a 5mm fragment is. Pull down. Looks pretty big up on that screen. If you look in that envelope, you can see it, but it's tiny. But what did Mr. Swanepoel say you could do with that tiny little fragment? Cut it in half, and it would still have valuable evidence. Cut it in half again, it could still have valuable evidence on it. Tiny little fragments, tiny little things give valuable pieces of forensic evidence. DNA, we're told, you can't see it, but it gives us valuable evidence. Tiny little things can give us valuable pieces of forensic evidence. And if they were going to contradict it, they could have, but they didn't. And let's talk about spear gold dot bullets for a second. Spear gold dot bullets fragment. And you know how we know? One hit, Brian Hulsey, in the leg. And what was found in his leg? Fragments from a spear gold dot .40 caliber bullet. The same bullet fragmented in Brian Hulsey's leg that they're now claiming couldn't fragment. And they threw those fragments away also. The instruction tells you that you can credit that disposal to Brian Hulsey's credit, find him not guilty, based upon that alone. Mr. Hulsey has no burden of proof. He took an immense risk in allowing us to go after and pull out the scientific evidence and bring it here to you. He had no obligation to make any statement to any witness to you. The burden of proof lies 100% on the state of Arizona through its prosecutor's office. 100%. Brian Hulsey didn't have to prove anything. He took a big risk in allowing us to show you this scientific evidence that they could have shown you, but they didn't. I didn't take any fancy counting, smoke and mirrors attack on this evidence. I didn't try to show you how 7 or 8 pieces of bullet slug magically convert into 13 slugs that were fired from Officer Goidia's gun. I wasn't the one that brought out that piece of fancy counting. Don't be misled by the fact that ShotSpotter didn't get the spot right. Quite frankly, that isn't why they wanted the analysis the day after the event. See, Glendale asked for the analysis the day after the event. Why? Because they wanted to hear how many shots were fired. They wanted to see how many shots were fired, to see if it corresponded with the evidence from the scene. It did. They found 13 casings from Officer Goidia's gun. And they found one slug from Brian Hulsey's gun. One slug that had no DNA on it, no tissue, nothing of any value. Glendale has used ShotSpotter since 2002 and renewed its contract not every 5 years, not every 10 years, every 12 years. Every year. 2002. They don't use and re-up with a system that they don't have confidence in. And in fact, we know that they're currently in the process of updating their system to the latest, greatest version. We know that computer systems upgrade. You don't leave your common sense behind when you go in and talk about these cases. When you go and talk about the facts of this case, you know that computers have improved over the course of the last 15 years. ShotSpotter continues to improve too. And they improved when we asked for a reanalysis. Their location was just as they said it would be, within 25 meters of the spot where the shots were fired. We showed you that analysis within 25 meters. We know the shots were fired on the corner. We know that. They were fired on the corner at 60th and Oregon. We know that. We're not looking using ShotSpotter to find where the shots were fired. We know where this incident happened. And when you look at Exhibit 379, which was the red dots from the first analysis, you see the address, 5939 West Missouri. And what's the explanation for the address? It's the whole lot. That's the address, and the whole lot is on Missouri. But the shots are actually found right here on 60th. So, we asked, is it possible you got the shot location wrong? Because we can hear the shots, the timing's right, but it seems like the location's wrong. Now, I didn't sit down with an analyst and go through calculus to make sure that they triangulated it right second time. You remember the triangulation, but the triangulation looked fancy ways, and where they all intersected. And where they all intersected came down to a spot at this corner. So, even though we already knew where the shots were, we now know that the reanalysis showed where the shots actually took place. Sensor 2 is in a different direction than sensor 11, which, if I could show you it, was over about, let's see, sensor 2 is here, sensor 11 is over here farther. This one's 250 meters away, sensor 11 was 512 meters away. Okay, a little bit farther away. But the important thing about that sensor is in a different direction. Now, it didn't pick up the last 3 shots because something interfered with the sound waves, not with the science. Those last 3 shots were fired by Officer Goitia close to a wall. Remember, I did this with the expert, close to a wall that was behind him, with sensor 11 down the road, the sound reflecting off the wall and shooting out in a different direction. Now, some of the sound might have carried over the building, but we can't hear it. Doesn't mean that the 11 shots that it picked up didn't happen. Oh yeah, and about my declaration to you that the 11th shot is the shot that Brian fired. It's the only shot that we hear a ricochet from. Now, if this courtroom again is the setup, right? That's the wall, all right? Back there is sensor 11. Officer Goitia shooting towards you. Sensor 2's over here. Brian, down on his knees, or laying on the ground after having been shot, somehow raises up and fires a shot not at Officer Goitia, not where all the casings are, but down the road at a house, just fires off a random shot. And we hear, ping. The reason why sensor 11 picks up that sound, that ping, is because that shot's being fired in the general direction of sensor 11. Not magic, science. Sensor 2, if you listen to it, it doesn't pick up the ping. Because the sound waves from the ping are not heading towards sensor 2, they're heading towards sensor 11. But on sensor 2, if you listen really careful, at the end of the 11th shot, you're going to hear a, oh. You hear something. You'll hear something. You can listen to it. See, that's the science, not the magic. State argues that the system is flawed. There's a difference between foolproof and fraud. See, Glendale hasn't used the system for 12 years because it's fraudulent. Because it is completely a botched system. In fact, we know from the testimony of Mr. Green that the Maricopa County Prosecutor's Office and the City of Glendale have used ShotSpotter to convict a man of first-degree murder. So they use it when it's convenient, and they don't use it if it doesn't show exactly what they want. We brought up the system with all of its warts so that you could see the benefits of the system. You don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Just because one part's bad, you don't throw out the whole thing. Yeah, 3, maybe 4 sensors weren't working properly. But Mr. Green even told you as he listened to one of those sensors that was supposedly down, he could still hear sound. And he told you that there were 5 sensors that picked up 11 shots. He only illustrated here graphically 3. But 5 picked up the 11 shots. ShotSpotter isn't perfect. He didn't say it was perfect. He said that they guaranteed that they pick up 80% of the shots fired in an area. That's their guarantee. Now, when you hear it right. The microphones don't cut out every other shot. They don't cut out 20% of the shots. You heard it. The microphone was working. You could hear the tape. It picked up 14 shots. It was working. There is no information, no evidence, no suggestion on the visual portion of the audio graphics that suggest that there was any other shots fired. If there had been, remember what Mr. Green and I went through so that you would, he said, if there were other shots fired, you would generally see something where you would see part of a shot, like I'm showing you here in sensor number 2. You might see part of a shot, but you wouldn't see the whole thing. That's what would lead you to think, yeah, there were other shots being fired. No. No other shots being fired. See, it's the hocus pocus proof. It's the only thing that you could use to base a conviction on, or base a conviction that there was more than 14 shots. There's no evidence to that effect. Yes, there is 2 witnesses that made statements that you can't believe. Patsy had a great story, along with Mr. Martinez. Great story. Man, it was every answer he wanted straight. As soon as I started asking her questions, she couldn't keep a straight face. She couldn't give us a straight answer. I wasn't insulting the lady when I asked her if meth caused her teeth to rot. I didn't know she had false teeth in. I asked her, she said, no, that didn't happen to me. I wasn't insulting her. I asked her if she knew that that's a common problem with meth. She said she knew it, but it didn't happen to her. What Patsy did say, and what was not contradicted, when I asked Patsy, didn't you tell one of the police officers that it could have been the one police officer who shot the other one? Read it to her right from her own transcript. She said, yeah. Yeah, that's what I said. If I had been wrong about what I was quoting her, we would have heard from the officer who took down the quotation. If I had misread the transcript, you'd have heard about it right then instantly. She said, yeah, it could have been the other officer, the one officer who shot the other officer. She didn't know. See, Patsy had this idea in her mind that she could either see through doors or that she saw through a crack. But Officer Goydia says there was no crack, the door wasn't open. And Patsy's head bobbing up and down more than a toy boat in a bathtub full of children. That logical, I mean, don't throw out your common sense. Shots start firing, your head's down, you're not going to peek up when shots are being fired. Head down until shots stop. And that's what she did. And then she got out of the car, but she couldn't remember where the body was. Because see, she said the body was right behind the car. But we know it wasn't. We know it wasn't right behind the car. And we know that no shots were fired on the passenger side of the car. I think a lot of you picked up on that because she asked questions about that. Was there blood on the passenger side of the car? This is the passenger side of the car in front of me. Somebody gets shot, who the medical examiner says will have bled profusely and immediately. Where is he going to start bleeding? On the same side of the car where he's shot. And we know that the medical examiner was right on that back. They said between the front door and the back door, observing what's going on, and now according to the state's theory, he gets shot in the head. Now he can stagger a couple of steps. What's a few steps? To the back of the car? To the middle of the back of the car? To the back corner of the car? There's no medical evidence to that. He could have staggered a couple of steps. What we know is that Officer Goydia said that he ran to the middle of the street, turned, and fired. And what did he fire at? The last spot that he saw him and Brian and Officer Hulsey standing. Right in between the spot where he was firing from somewhere in this general area, and the spot where they were all last standing at the front of the car is the spot where Officer Hulsey fell. Why did he fall there? Because that's where he was shot. Where he was knocked out. And that's where he was knocked out. And that's where he bled profusely from. This was a horrible accident. A horrible accident. This isn't about somebody being dumb. This is about a horrible accident. Somebody saw a gun. Or perceived he saw a gun. When I asked Officer Goyde about getting out of the car, the whole getting out of the car scene, he gave us a different story than what we'd heard before. And I asked him if it was a different story. He admitted it was different. Because in one story, according to Patsy, Brian just gets out of the car and just starts blasting. Okay, we've already talked about that. There's just nothing to back that up. Now, in Officer Goyde's first story told when he was at, I always forget the name of the place, when he was at the special location they take the officer, he told a story about Brian backing out of the car, turning, and that as he turned, he then produced a gun, which Officer Goyde saw. And then he started running, and he outran the bullets that were whizzing past his ears. He ran to a spot, turned, and started firing. That's not the story we heard in court. It's a story that keeps on changing, keeps on evolving. Because if you can't conceive yourself doing something inconceivable, you're going to think about it. And you're going to go, well, this must have been what happened. This had to be what happened. This time, by that I mean when we were in court, Officer Goyde gave us a very detailed explanation that he'd never given before, how he pulled Brian out of the car. He shuts the door, or the door is almost shut. He wasn't sure. And then he takes Brian to the front of the car, where he's going to pat him down. And when he's at the front of the car, about to be patted down, he said that he grabbed Brian's arm. Now, I didn't know what that meant, so I said, do you mean you tapped Brian on the shoulder so that he'd turn around? No. Well, did you touch him and tell him to turn around? No. He volunteered. I grabbed him by the arm. Well, if you're not expecting somebody to grab you by the arm, you might shrug them off. Especially if somebody grabs you strongly by the arm and you're not expecting it. So if Brian whirled with his hands up and a t-shirt on, and Officer Goyde, as he's whirling, sees a gun, could he have perceived hands and gun meant a gun in a hand? I don't know. He doesn't know. He doesn't know what happened. The story keeps changing. See, this whole now I'm up at the front of the car story, and then he brings out the gun again and starts firing that. And if that shot is what killed Officer Hulsey again, then he rose up from his leg. He fired. Then we exchanged gunfire. Shots were being fired. Not one, multiple. But I'm going to say only two. Then remember how Mr. Martinez intimated that when Brian was down here, that he fired a shot that hit this wall here. Remember him saying, who's right across from here? What's right across from here? Who's right across from here? He kept asking everybody, who's right across from here? intimating clearly that Brian fired that shot to hit that wall. So now we've got, let's reduce this. Let's say he only fired 2 shots to start with. It's fire. And then he fired from his knee, and then he fired a bunch of shots, and then he fired over there at the wall. Oh, and let's not forget the new one, the perpendicular shot. So now we've got a minimum of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or more shots. 7 to 9 shots being fired by Brian. I'm not trying to create a fancy count of it. I don't know how many shots were fired. But here I know it wasn't 7, it wasn't 6, it wasn't 5. There are 4 empty casings in Brian's gun. Empty casings, we were told, are a lot like fingerprints. You can see a fingerprint on the surface. You don't know when it was placed there. A revolver doesn't leave a mark, a date stamp, when it fires it around. So we don't know if that gun was loaded with 6 full loaded shots or not. We just don't know. I'm not going to say it was, I'm not going to say it wasn't. We don't know. But there were 4 empties. But only 1 slug. Only 1 slug was found. They said they searched in the area of this truck. I asked Detective Hopkins. Searched in the area of this truck. And the reason why I'm asking about that is because if Brian's firing as Officer Goydia starts to run, we're going to see shots in the police cars, or we're going to see shots in his houses. Or maybe even houses down behind here. They looked. Nothing. There's nothing to corroborate their theory of where the shots were fired. There's nothing. There is a slug over underneath the tree. Item 3rd. That's the only slug they found. Now they searched east and west on the south side of Oregon. Of Oregon. They searched the grassy area on Oregon. On 60th. They searched the other side of the street where there are big trees. Nothing. Interestingly, if they wanted to test their own theory, or even test my theory, if my theory is correct, shots were fired here, get Officer Hulsey here, because he thought Brian was standing here, and the shot would have ended up here. He saw the road. Rope went here. He didn't search north to the key. Why? Because you don't search where you don't want to find information. You don't test your theory, that's just going to give you what you want. One of the elements of both first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder is an intention. So we have to look at what evidence there was of intention. And at the scene, what did Officer Goydia tell us? Officer Goydia said that when he went up to the car to start with, pulled Nikki out of the car, everything was calm. And when he went and put Nikki in the car, everything seemed calm. Then when he came back, he said, when he was asking Brian about the purse, and Brian said, could he bring his purse? He said Brian was calm. And I asked him, I said, you see a lot of people that are uncooperative, right? And he goes, yeah, sometimes. I said, you recognize uncooperative behavior? Yes. Was Brian demonstrating that? No. When he took Brian out of the car, I asked him, was Brian calm? He said, yeah, everyone was calm. Everyone was being cooperative. I said, well, did he get out too slow or too fast? He said, no, either one of those would have drawn my attention. So he wasn't getting out too fast or too slow. But yet, the testimony is that now, once Officer Goydia grabbed Brian's arm, that's when it went crazy. That's when Officer Goydia panicked. He saw something that made him panic. Officer Goydia is a police officer, and all police officers deserve respect. This isn't about not deserving respect, and it's not about not doing your job. But he was in a situation just a year and a half before this case in which he was confronting another man, and he told the man to get out of the car. And instead of getting out of the car, the man backed up his car and started coming at him. And what did he do? Officer Goydia started firing at him. And he kept firing at him right to the point that he was run over. That doesn't mean he's a bad officer. He got run over by this guy. But it is a traumatic situation for anyone. It doesn't make it less traumatic because you're a police officer. He got run over. And what did he say? When I asked him about the Lopez case, we're talking 9 years later, his reaction was immediate. Oh yeah, that's another crazy guy that tried to run me over. I actually ran him. He ran me over and tried to kill me, I think were the words he used. He ran me over and tried to kill me. It was still fresh in his mind 9 years later. And I don't blame him for that. Somebody ran me over, be fresh in my mind forever probably too. That doesn't mean he didn't suffer some type of post-traumatic stress disorder. We know that exists. Again, you use your everyday common experiences and knowledge when you decide these cases. You know that somebody who suffers a traumatic near-death experience is going to experience some trauma later. Mr. Goydia thought he saw a gun, and he thought that meant he was going to get killed, and so he took off running. That doesn't mean that anybody actually tried to kill him.
Good place for a break?
I think it is. So we're going to go ahead and take our afternoon break. It'll take about 15 minutes. Until then, remember the admonition. We'll take about 15 minutes. We're outside the presence of the jury. Anybody need anything on the record, Mr. Reeves?
Nope.
Thank you.
All right, I'll see you in about 15 minutes, and we'll continue with the defense closed.
Were they done during the break?
Yeah, sure. Something.
I wrote some things up your mouth.
Yeah. Here's a question. Do I take the rest of the afternoon? Like,
So I really think I'm gonna go ahead and jump. Wait, I want to say, back and tries to say anything about that. Object and ask because the report says this GPS, whether that's an evidence or contrary to something that's. He tried to admit it, it wasn't it wasn't there. It says something contrary to what he has in his thing. Should be called.
yeah.
Don't get big. I was about ready to start singing over here.
Sure doesn't fall in that one.
I'd call you Don. Beautiful.
Absolutely.
They'll send it to you and let me have it for a while or something. Maybe I saw that on an email. They'll mail you one and you can like settle into that. Yeah. Well, the state convention is so close. I think I'm just gonna wait till that Steve is gonna be there. You need to leave, I'll be here. You need to leave, I'll have